gathered today on a significant historical period in our history to celebrate the Holocaust. It represents the most suffering by any group, any race in recent human history. Perhaps, as you look around events over the last few centuries, something seemed to be different about the African slave and their descendants. Perhaps it's because we're the only group with woolly hair, I don't know. But throughout the centuries, we've had to struggle to gain freedom and most of all recognition as human beings. As we celebrate today in Guyana, the challenge is monumental because we see evidence all around us that people are beginning to take us for granted. We who civilized the entire coastal belt, we who prepared the way for the immigrants who came subsequently. And I think today we need to act and perhaps do less talking. Today I call upon every teacher, every elder, every Guyanese, irrespective of race, color or creed, to begin a process, as I said, to educate so that we can stimulate our young people to understand the reality of this world. Educate so they have that power of knowledge to stimulate and to see that we do the right things. As I said elsewhere, to educate so that we can agitate in order to be really liberated. We're not yet liberated. Remember that even as emancipation loomed in 1838, there were slaves who felt that they were in a better state as slaves than to be free men and women. Today, we have amongst us descendants of that view. I recall, for example, at an Emancipation Day celebration, where the children and descendants of manumitted Africans gathered, that no less a person than our Prime Minister, Mr. Samuel Hines, told the gathering that we should forget the past. No one else forgets the past. We've used the past as a teaching tool to help us to deal with the mistakes we've made and to give us the spiritual strength to move forward as a people, to gain a place in the history of the world. I recall, and his intentions were good and noble, no less a person than Dr. Chedi Jagan, when he was president of this country, intoned that the Afro-Guyanese were at the bottom of the ladder. We've got to move up from being at the bottom of the ladder because there's no other group that made the kind of sacrifices we made. We were dehumanized, we were used as less than chattel animals to civilize our coastal belt. Worse, we were humiliated as no other group was. We were exploited as no other group was. And today, that education must be to help our young people understand that we may be free of the chains, but mental slavery still exists among many of our own people. The challenge today, as we celebrate this day, is to educate. And I ask, again, every teacher, every elder, to devote a few hours every week, or every month, or every day if possible, to get hold of some set of our young people, particularly those still in school, those in university, to first of all, tell them something about their own ancestors. I was speaking a few days ago to some young people, and they knew nothing of their grandparents. That is a serious matter. But beyond that, to help them understand what slavery was all about, the indelible mark it left on our people, and the fact that we still have the struggle to be liberated. What bothers me today is that those who now occupy high office seem not to appreciate or not to know the history of this country. And ignorance is a serious matter. Recently, we had no less a person than the High Commissioner to India asking that part of the promenade gardens and Middle Street renamed after Mahatma Karamchand Gandhi, the great Mahatma Gandhi. I expect he did not know better. But if that report I saw in the Chronicle is accurate, and I'm told it is an insult to every descendant of the African slave woman and slave man. It's an insult. It is an attempt to put us not at the bottom of the ladder, but beneath the ladder. And I call upon the President, who was present almost 2 weeks ago, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has, I believe, African blood, to comment on this bizarre and unacceptable request that we should rename Middle Street after Gandhi and the promenade gardens. Because, as my friends from the 1823 monument have said, and I hope their statement is published, that the promenade gardens, Middle Street, and the parade ground was once one block of land, where in 1823 the only crime committed by the suffering slaves was they struck for their freedom. What did the European plantocracy do? They hunted them down like animals, caught them, played upon the division which existed in certain quarters, cut their heads off, put their bleeding heads on poles to decorate that area we now know as the Promenade Gardens, Middle Street, and Independence Park, or the parade ground. That area is therefore sacred ground to every Guyanese, but in particular to Afro-Guyanese, and for anyone, including the Indian High Commissioner, to suggest it be named after Gandhi is unacceptable. We have been very kind, generous to Gandhi all these years. But now that this absurd suggestion has been made, Guyanese young people need to know that Gandhi, while in South Africa, was no friend of the black native South Africans. Absolutely not. His struggle was for the Indians and the so-called colored people. And in fact, the 1823 movement has revealed that they found 71 quotes from Gandhi in which he said unkind things about the black South Africans. When the white South Africans proposed that the blacks and the Indians use a particular door or entry in public buildings, Gandhi objected because he believed, his theology was that the Indian was of a higher level, perhaps a higher caste than the black South Africans. Therefore, to name an area after Gandhi where the blacks suffered the humiliation of death and damnation is unacceptable. And I'm repeating myself. The President was President, 2 weeks have passed and we've not heard a word from him. Are we to believe in the old mantra that silence means consent? How can a president be silent? How can a minister of foreign affairs be silent when such statements are made? When these same people are talking about one Guyana. Does that one Guyana mean the same thing that Gandhi meant when he struggled for freedom in South Africa? The one meaning the Indians and the colored, and that the blacks were perhaps relegated to stand back? I wonder. But my dear friends, today the task is ahead of us. We've got to help those organizations that have stayed at the forefront to celebrate Black history and to give our young people a sense of gumption that the struggle is far from over. Look at what has happened and is happening in Guyana. The Henry brothers were punished, tortured in West Coast police. The police seem to have been very easygoing on this question, to the point where a relative took the law into his own hands. I'm not saying it was right, but we need to understand the feeling of that young man when he killed someone he assumed was responsible for the torture of his family. We don't want that. But then the government must act with fairness. Recently we had at Dartmouth, an African village by every sense of the word, which was used as a slave farm years ago. That's why the average person of Dartmouth is bigger than the rest of us. A young man in the prime of his life, invaded by a SWAT team, shot and killed in his bed. And believe it or not, the police commander was able to get the residents to be quiet. I don't know what kind of investigation will take place, because unless the opposition is involved, unless the authentic civil society is involved, we can't expect a fair and just result from the investigation. The SWAT team was designed, given special training, special weapons, to deal with possible military incursion, particularly on our borders. It was not designed to go into a man's house where only he, his wife, and small helpless children dwell. It was not designed for that. There are other units of the police force. And we all worry when a government will use the SWAT team for such nefarious purposes and then get the citizens to be quiet after a few days. This brings me to a point I want to make on this day. Perhaps because of our history, perhaps because of the way Christianity was introduced to slaves before 1838, perhaps the way the white missionaries interpreted the Bible for us, we are too forgiving of people. If we forgive as easily as we seem to do, people will literally walk all over us, and that's happening today. If we forgive these atrocities, if we forgive the harm being done to our young people, what does living mean? Forgiving is good. The Bible tells us so. But even though it may take us to heaven, it will rob us of the glorious goods that we need to make life on this earth happy and pleasant. And therefore, let us forgive. But let's be careful and not to forget. You see, when slavery ended in 1838, we forgive the immigrants who came because we understood they were brought here by the plantocracy. And that is something our Indo, Chinese, Portuguese, Amerindian, and mixed communities need to recognize from the onset, the European theology, the imperialist system was to divide and rule. And the African was always at the center of this division. Today, Haitians are given a rough time in Guyana. But we see over 26,000 Venezuelans, all with straight hair, in Guyana, being fed, being given money by the government and the American establishment. We have not yet heard any plausible explanation why the Haitians, potential immigrants, are treated so badly, and the Venezuelans and those who come from particular Amerindian tribe in Venezuela are given royal treatment. We need answers from this government, if this government is indeed to rule in the interests of all Guyana. We heard a few weeks ago that there'll be some legislation to deal with illegal immigrants. The next thing that happened, the arrows seem to be pointed towards the Haitians alone. We can only come to one conclusion, that the Haitians are of African stock and therefore must be treated less than other people. In the same way Gandhi treated the black South African less than the coloreds and the Indians in South Africa. Today, my friends, at the risk of repeating myself, every teacher, every scholar, every professional should make it his or her task to get hold of many of our young people who have already gone astray, who are already detached from reality. Help them understand the importance of knowing their past and the glories of their slave ancestors and the significance of the Holocaust. Men who were empire builders were tricked, snatched, put in boats, brought across the transatlantic journey, and enslaved. They didn't leave Africa slaves, as some people try to pretend. They were enslaved once they landed in North America or the Caribbean. And Robin Blackburn, in his book, The Overthrow of Colonial Slavery, reminds us that the Europeans made fabulous fortunes out of slavery. And that is what we need to remind our people today. As oil looms, they're making fabulous fortunes. In the gold fields, when the Africans left the plantation, they found that gold. They suffered the trauma of the rapids and the waterfalls. Today, that gold is being harvested by the same people who exploited us centuries ago. We must be very, very careful. We must know our history. Ali Missouri professor, when he came here to celebrate our anniversary of emancipation, reminded us that other people have made good their suffering, but the African neither sacralized his suffering and turned it into sacred doctrine, nor did we use our sufferings as a political fund. Serious indictment, but so true. I speak to young people sometimes, and I spoke to two youngsters last week, Afro-Guyanese, and they said all they're interested is money. Those who are opposed to the idea of real equality for black people understand what has happened to our people over the years, and therefore they're throwing coins at them to keep them quiet and to make them manageable while they continue to exploit the resources of this country. We can only make a change if we unite first as black people and second as Guyanese. Unite and know that the exploitation which took place a few hundred years ago is still very well in place. Look what happened in the United States recently. Who can forget 1921? Greenwood was a thriving black community after World War I, described as the Black Wall Street in America. But those who fought on the side of the South in the American Civil War did not relish the idea. So we had race riots in Tulsa in the United States. These are lessons that we must learn and teach to our young people, and ensure that by the agitation, by the education, by the agitation, it must never happen again. Happy day, and let me end by pleading with all of us: educate so we can agitate to liberate. God bless us all.